Thanks very much, Billy. And I just have about 20 minutes, so I guess I'm going to say I'll be back because I'm back and forth to this state as well as the country quite a lot. As Billy said, I am based in Toronto, but we work every week, I would say, in the U.S. There are about three of us that are at the policy strategy level. Ben Levin, Andy Hargraves, is based in Boston actually, and myself. We've got people at what we call capacity building, instructional development, and also a couple of others that support it. You can go to my website, michaelfullan.ca, CA for Canada, and download PDFs. And there's one I just emphasized that I wrote about 2 years ago as a result of our experience in looking at other countries. It's called Choosing the Wrong Drivers for Whole System Reform. So a driver is a policy or a strategy that goes along with a policy that's intended to improve the system. A wrong driver is such a strategy that's intended to improve it, but there's no evidence anywhere in the world that that particular driver has ever worked. And a right driver, of course, is the flip side of that. Just to say a couple of things before I mention and focus on the drivers, I'd like to, if I had longer, I'd build a case slightly differently. But when we started in Ontario in 2003, it was a stagnant system. We have 13 million population, 5,000 schools, only 72 districts, but these 5,000 schools, stagnant in literacy, numeracy, high school graduation. And we put into practice a small number of things that I should say about Canada, there's no federal agency in education. This means we don't get any money, but we don't get any grief either. We just do it ourselves. What we started to do was to take focus on a small number of ambitious goals: literacy, numeracy, high school graduation, that we added early learning. We then invested in capacity building, which is developing the capacity of teachers to be more effective in schools and school districts, and working on that. And I'll leave the rest of the explanation to the drivers. There are only 4 sets, so that we can frame them that way. We work all over this country, and for example, in California, we have major work going on now. We're in a project that I call Leading from the Middle. That is to say, if you look at California, it's at the state level, it's been a mess for, 20 years or a long time anyways. So that you really couldn't get any leadership from the state level. And they have a large number of districts, over 1,000. So we started working with clusters of districts funded by a couple of foundations. And these districts and clusters now add up to about probably serving more than half of the students in California. And leadership from the middle means the district in this case. It is not the sole strategy, but is to get a center of pressure going to push into the development of these strategies that do work. It's not so much we invented the strategies in Ontario. In fact, we borrowed a lot from the research in this country and from other places. But we did have the opportunity to systematically put them into place. And they worked. So our literacy and numeracy, especially literacy, went up over 20% on the average, 4,000 schools, so incredible, and then some more than others. High school graduation went from 68% to 82%. This is across the whole set, 900 schools. So this stuff starts to look very attractive because it works, and it works by focusing on it and not getting distracted from the main agenda. We describe it as the moral imperative. Lots of people talk about those terms, but they're only words on a page. We do it by doing it, I guess I want to say. So this means focusing on all the subgroups, raise the bar, close the gap, and literacy, numeracy, high school graduation, and so forth. And in doing that, we have all the subgroups for us are special education, schools in poverty, English language learners, Toronto, Greater Toronto area, 5 million people. More than 57% of the students' English is not their first language at home, so great diversity all the time. And these strategies then are pinpointed to the subgroup. So let me just, in the little bit of time I have, talk about the 4 so-called drivers. I want to compare, I'll just give you the names first. If you go down the wrong drivers, here they are. Accountability, wrong driver. Human capital, which is focusing only on individual development, wrong driver. Technology, wrong driver. And ad hoc policies, wrong driver. And if you could picture this, if I had it, I'd put it up on the screen, but down the other side is capacity building compared to accountability, social capital compared to human capital, and instruction compared to technology being the driver, and then more coordinated policies compared to ad hoc policies. So that's the frame of it, but it works. Let me take accountability, because obviously we don't say accountability isn't important. But what we do say is when you approach it in a certain way indirectly, you get more accountability than if it's in your face. So in your face accountability is punitive accountability, which is used for mainly to embarrass people, to get some action, as if you could do it directly by saying, if we criticize you, we're pretty sure you'll be motivated to improve. That doesn't work that way. And the way that we get at accountability is indirectly, I guess I'll say, by doing two things. One is transparency, so not just the results out in the open, and now everywhere that's the case, results of groups and subgroups, but also practice. What are people doing to get better results, and who's being more successful than others, and how can we have strategies that pull that out? So absolute openness about what people are doing and what results they're getting, that's transparency. But it's paired with what I'm going to call, and this is a bit of a tricky concept, non-judgmentalism. Non-judgmentalism is when you see something that's not working, and your first reaction is not to blame the people, but to invest in capacity building to get better. And you can see where that combination of transparency and non-judgmentalism actually gets better accountability. Richard Elmore from Harvard said this a dozen years ago. He said, no amount of external accountability will be effective in the absence of internal accountability. When groups are doing things and they're open and they're accountable to themselves and to the outside. So that we have been able to get a lot of accountability by having it out in the open. The pressure is still there because it's transparent. The results have to be moving forward. But the motivation to do it is through leadership, through development, and other activities. We've also recently, in the last 2 years, started to put into place early learning. I know you have a strong interest in this. Early learning, which is the funding of all 4 and 5-year-olds, 100% full day kindergarten integrated with daycare. And we phased it in over 4 years. We're halfway through it. 125,000 out of the eligible 250,000 children are now in, and next year will be 75%, and the year after that 100%. We're doing the research as we go in the development. That is, what is it that these students would do during the day? What's the role of early learning educators and regular teachers as they integrate? How do you prepare grade 1 and grade 2 teachers for students that are coming from 4 and 5-year-olds? And also looking at the evidence. The evidence broadly, as you probably know, is that if you do it properly, you get big payback. It's worth the investment many times over, 7 to 10 times over. And we are already getting results that when we started this, the base was 28%, and it'd be higher in some jurisdictions. 28% of students coming into grade 1 were not prepared to be, they were behind their peers. That figure now we expect will be reduced soon to 14%. I mean, you keep going and going on this work. I'm not here today in this kind of sudden appearance to criticize the policies that, and I know you're looking at funding, but in addition to the absolute relentless work about addressing the funding issues and stopping the cuts and getting selective investments, the next most important thing is how you spend the money and how you avoid wasting of the money. And we have a category we call distractors, avoid the distractors. And a distractor is when you put money into something that is not a good driver to begin with, but actually then eats up not only money, but time and energy at the expense of how it could be spent. So I'm talking about resources, money for sure, but also people's energy. And one of those that I know that you've introduced recently, your governor has, is teacher evaluation and appraisal. If you think of those drivers, I'm not going to go through them systematically, but the second driver was human versus social capital, if you use the jargon. And when you try to use teacher evaluation and appraisal as the main driver, you end up into a long distraction of wasting time getting data that won't actually influence improvement. And so let me give actually a very simple explanation of this individual versus social capital combination. It's actually a study in New York City done by a business professor, Carrie Liana, who's at the University of Pittsburgh. She took a sample of 135 elementary schools, and she measured only 3 things: human capital, the quality of the teachers on paper, their competencies; social capital, which was in relation to questions like this, the following question that she asked teachers: to what extent do you in this school work with other teachers in collaboration to focus on improving learning and student achievement? If a lot of students said that's the way we work, or a lot of teachers I should say, said that's the way we work in this school, she said here's a school with higher social capital. And then she measured math achievement, beginning of the year, end of the year. You see where I'm going with this. Schools that had just higher human capital didn't do as well as schools that had higher social capital, and schools that had both, of course, were more effective. And she also found that teachers who were, had fewer qualifications actually did better if they were in a school with social capital. So this is pretty strongly stated. When you think of what I call the wrong driver, so let's take individual development of teachers, a wrong driver. I don't mean it's wrong not to pay attention to it. I mean it's wrong to put all the money on that in order to get the results. That you have to actually reverse it and invest in teachers working together, collaboration, really focused work, the transparency of data, the implementation of all of this, and that's what works. It works. So why do politicians choose wrong drivers? I think the short answer is because they're in a hurry, because they can legislate it, because it appeals to the public in a superficial way. All of those things, and the things I'm not talking about are not they're not overnight fixes, but they're also they start to kick in after about 2 years. So when I think about some of your policies that I've seen recently, and I'll be back with a few different groups, and I'm meeting tomorrow with NISCO's leaders for a day workshop here, and then a couple of other times in the next few months. The things that I see in your combination is to move away from teacher evaluation as the negative force and instead integrate it in with what we call the team development strategies, to integrate it as part of that. Secondly, to be able to keep investing in early learning, because we know that has a big effect. And thirdly, to not use strategies that pit people against each other, competitive grants in other words. Because when you pit people against each other, you actually get a win-lose situation. And this is about getting people to see the common destiny that is really integrated with better education systems. Every country that's successful, including some provinces as well as Ontario, and the other countries that we work with, all know that investing in the collaborative development of a whole bunch of people who are devoted and relentless and specific and precise about making it better, that's where you get results on a large scale. So we continue to work on what we call whole system reform. We do it with specific strategies in development and with partnerships. And I'm sorry I don't have more time to elaborate. Do go on the website, see what that looks like, and I'd be glad to take a couple of comments or questions before we wrap up. Thanks very much.
I'll encourage you to either go down those steps or over here. Questions?
you. I wish you were here to say that about the competitive grants 15 minutes ago. I'm specifically interested in what you're doing with literacy. This is an area that I'm involved with, especially dyslexic students, which number 20% of the population worldwide.
Let me. It's a full story because we've done a lot on it for 9 years now. You can go to the Ontario Ministry of Education website and go to the Literacy Numeracy Secretariat, and you see all kinds of resources and ideas. What we've done is make it a priority, 100% for everybody. What we've done is just begin to identify what practices are effective, and then to spread those. We worked in between the government, which I've been advising, where we created a unit to work with school districts to have them focus on, the words I want to use are precision, specificity, and clarity. That is, what practices actually work, not only with lots of students, but also what practices in particular work with subgroups, such as special education, dyslexia, such as boys compared to girls illiteracy. Whatever the subgroup is that we begin to pinpoint it. So it's not actually rocket science. It really is identifying what works, spreading it, helping people get better at it, and then beginning to see the results and know that what you've done by way of improving practice here has produced results there. And then you use that degree of transparency for two purposes. One is to spread it laterally, so other people, we put money into people finding out from each other how to work this. And then secondly, it works as a kind of pressure point, because once you get some schools and districts that are on the move, then you start to compare them. We have a statistical strategy we call statistical neighbors, which means we want schools to, in an accountability sense, to do the following three things in this order. Compare yourself with yourself. That is, where was your school last year, and where is it this year, and where is it going by way of literacy? Compare yourself with other schools that are similar to you, similar circumstances, apples to apples, in other words, and then what does that reveal? And then push for the limits of additional resources. So this is about pinpointing the goal and identifying some of the things that really work, and then giving teachers individually and collectively the experiences that build their capacity in relation to those particular instructional practices. Always linked to the impact of results, so you can show that you're on the right track, and so that you can spread the good word. You'll find the resources, the video clips, and the other things, and the strategies described in the website. Okay.
I'm so glad you made it, but I wish you were going to be here about another hour at least.
Yeah, well, I'll be back, as I said.
This is a tangled question, but I'm from Buffalo. We have very strong evidence in Buffalo that suggests that we know, and in many cases do, the lift to have children enter school ready, at level or above level. We also have disturbingly consistent evidence that by grade 3 to 5, all of that advantage is gone, and many of those children are now failing, and we see the typical 5th grade slump in literacy, the predictors for dropout, so on and so forth. So part one of the question is, how do you deal with this issue of precision, specificity, and clarification to say, okay, we got this part right. Do not allow the political will to say, it didn't work, we're not going to do early childhood education anymore, we're going to shift money, take it away from somebody, and put it into middle school or whatever the next intervention we can create is. And specifically with regard to the subgroups that you've mentioned, and some you did not mention that I'd like to bring up. In our case, we've heard iterated many times today the issue of young males of color. Is that something that you have looked, you mentioned males and you mentioned English language learners,
right.
You did not go to the race question, and I will certainly do it every time because we have to address it if we're going to ever get through it. And the other is in the context of Canadian practice, because I've been following it pretty closely, and I think it applies equally well in New York State, where do you see the things that you have suggested and recommended as a model with regard to indigenous populations,
Right.
specifically the Native Americans? And I'm thinking of, I don't know, more, some of whose children are doing just fine from what I can see, and many, many who are not, and they're not doing well in New York State.
Okay, so let me take the beginning part, the slippage after you get into grades 4 and 5 and so forth. I also mentioned that fourth wrong driver, which is ad hoc policies versus more coordinated policies, so that's where I want to go. We call our strategy whole system reform. We use that phrase, those 3 words. Whole system reform means the whole system. It doesn't mean pieces. And so we actually started with, I won't say we did this strategically, but we started with elementary schools, literacy and numeracy, in other words, grade 1 to grade 8, 6 or 7 or 8. And then after that, we started to add more intensively the early learning. I'm not saying you should do that sequence, but that's what we've done. But apropos of your point, as we've been phasing in early learning, 4 and 5-year-olds in the last 2 years, we have included that in that professional development. How do we provide professional development for grade 1 and grade 2 teachers to make the connection between what these children are learning in the new format in 4 and 5 as they enter into school? We already have whole school reform. That is, I can take you to any of the 4,000 schools in the province, and we could walk in the door and within and right away say, this is what this school is doing in literacy. Here's its success or its lack of success, whatever it is. So the way to kind of make it less likely that the discontinuity occurs is you're working on elementary school reform as you're working on early learning, and you're connecting the two. You don't just do one and hope it will follow through, just because it won't do that. You have to make a coordinated effort. So we've done that, and if the same with high school. We blitzed literacy in grade 9 and 10. Literacy. Literacy is not for the English teachers. It's for the whole school. And so you blitz literacy in grade 9 and 10 as you've done it all the way through, and you put just that part together. I've said 4 and 5-year-olds, elementary school, early high school literacy, all integrated. Then you've got a kind of a coordinated effort, and that does pay off for the reasons that you said. And if you don't do that, you get the waste of investment. On the subgroups, you probably know we have a lot of immigrants. I said 57%, huge diverse populations, 120 languages in a lot of different schools in Metro Toronto, but we don't have a dominant subgroup, an ethnic subgroup, the way in the US, the way you have with African Americans and now it's Hispanics. So there's not a heavily dominant single subgroup, but there are lots of other groups that are sizable and add up in a critical mass. The only group we haven't progressed on reducing, I don't mean eliminating the gap, but reducing the gap, is Aboriginals. That's the only group we haven't been able to do. Yeah, what we call Aboriginal in First Nations or in Ontario. So that's a priority now. I'm not saying that we should have done better, but we didn't. But what happens when you commit yourself to each subgroup and you have the transparent data all the time, you can't get away with saying, well, we're not going to work on it, because it stares you in the face, all of this data. And so that keeps the pressure on. It keeps it on. I hope with the First Nations group that we will have some progress, but everybody's having, across Canada, huge problems in being able to address that problem. They're mobilizing to do that, and we'll be part of it. But you never get away from the agenda of each and every subgroup being implicated, because the moral imperative means you disaggregate the data, you look at the progress in real time, and you do something about it. That's how we want to do it. But good combination of questions. I could have given another speech, I think, on one question, but I almost did. Okay, a couple more.
Yep, you, Diane Ravitch, and a number of other leading educational theorists seem to be on the same page concerning teacher evaluation, testing, accountability, and so forth and so on. Yet, although these are huge expenses and probably going to take more and more of the budget in the future, the politicians don't seem to be on the same page.
Right.
What can be done to convince them, since they disagree, they're on the polar opposite of the educational theorists? What can be done to convince them that you may be right?
Okay. We work both sides of the street, I'm going to say it that way, which is to say we're working with schools and school districts and what I call the middle to build up that agenda and Andy Hargraves and I, Andy's based at Boston College, we published a book several months ago called The Professional Capital of Teachers. And it is a deep, deep argument with action recommendations that basically says, if you go down the road of the individualistic, what we call business capital paradigm that you characterize, you will get divisive, unimpressive results. It's a strategy, it's a wrong driver that can't possibly work. It can, by heavy appraisal, you can perhaps with incentives please the top 10%, not really have much of an impact on the bottom 10%, and piss off the other 80%. Like what kind of strategy is that to count on? So we are pushing hard at the policy level and making some progress. That is to say, we are, I think, having some really impact at the state level. State superintendent in California, others we've met with and worked with around the country who are sympathetic to the alternative argument that hammering home negatively on teachers with that evaluation won't work. I also think it's a bit of a conundrum what one of the Harvard professors, a young professor named Jal Mehta, just has a book coming out in May called The Allure of Order, O-R-D-E-R. And he says what the policies are doing now is trying to correct at the back end with heavy punitive policies, which they should have invested at the front end, which is our capacity building. So it's really kind of a huge problem. I think finally, and you mentioned Diane Ravitch, absolutely right on, powerful argument. But if you look closely, she doesn't really say what to do about it. She said it's wrong to do it because it's ineffective, and we should stop doing the wrong thing, which I agree with. But what we're working on is what is the alternative? And the alternative is this stronger sense of professional capacity, where we need superintendents and others to lead it. We need the people like the Alliance to lead it, and we also need union leaders to be able to shift additionally into the positive agenda of building professional capacity of the teachers of the teaching profession, which is not individual autonomy, but it is collective and collaborative work at the school and the district and across districts for that matter and networks. So we keep pushing hard on it. We're pushing hard on what the alternatives might be for solutions, not just the criticism of why it doesn't work, but how can we formulate these solutions which are actually around the right driver constellation.
Last question here, sorry.
The title of the book?
Yes.
It's called Professional Capital. So you can find it on my website. It's Hargraves and Fullan, Professional Capital, Transforming the Teaching Profession. And it's on both Andy's website and mine.
I was wondering if you could touch on a bit, I guess, your experiences with both the Canadian and American political systems, because in this country, whether it be on the federal or state level, we're dominated one way or another by two political parties who are both pretty much controlled by the same corporate entities. And without, I guess, what would be your equivalent of federal oversight, provincial, I assume provincial oversight in
Right.
Ontario, and that probably some kind of multi-party system. What have been your experiences with that?
Just three things. It's again a big question, but three quick things. One is we have no federal agency, I mentioned. So I wouldn't mind if we did, as long as it didn't do the wrong things. So you could imagine a federal agency that pulls together a national focus for Canada. That would be helpful. So I think that's one thing. In your own case, sticking with the federal, I don't think it's that influential in many ways. And the state is the unit that when we work in the US, I'm thinking of how can we mobilize the state, which means the school community, the districts and regions, and the state level. So I think the state is the unit. That's one point. The two other things, and these are big differences. There's a difference in governance that has to do with that you have many more local school boards than we do in Canada. We just take the obvious comparisons. If you take Ontario and compare it to Illinois or Michigan or Pennsylvania, we have 13 million people. Those other states have approximately the same populations. And Illinois, just to take that, 800 districts, same population, we have 72. And so when you get to thousands, we've got 14,000 districts, California, 1,000 districts, you get a lot of local politicians and pieces that are very hard to coordinate. So governance is a big difference. And then second big difference is per pupil expenditure, which 20 years or more ago now, Canada, almost independently, province by province, equalized the financial scheme. We still have local taxes, but it all goes into the province level, and the province then with a financial formula distributes it so you don't get any discrepancies. Well, the discrepancies are based on need. That is, the formula generates more money for students at risk and poverty and special education. But here you get wide discrepancies between on per pupil expenditures across the districts, which is a great and equitable starting point and continuing point. We don't have that. So those governance and the distribution of money are two big structural differences. Okay.
Thank you. Let's give another hand there to Michael Fullan. Thank you.